This is your math gal, Julie Harland. Please visit my website at yourmathgal.com, where all of my videos are organized by topic. All right, we're going to continue graphing trig functions. And in particular, we're going to keep on graphing sine functions. So in this video, we'll learn how to graph a sine function that has a period that is different than 2 pi, and we'll determine how to figure out what the period is from an equation. So first of all, we've done a lot of problems where we've graphed y equals the sine of x, something of this form. We might have had a different amplitude, etc. But the period has always been 2 pi. And this is what the graph looks like. This is 2 cycles of the sine function. And here are our key points over here. Given a value of x, what the sine of x is. So now we're going to figure out how would I graph y equals the sine of 2x. Now notice that's different. This is not y equals 2 sine of x. That's something completely different. And in this problem we have an amplitude of 2. All right, so we're going to do something different. How would we graph it if 2x is what is in the parentheses? So what's different here is I have a coefficient in front of the x. Well, one thing we can do is use these values of x right here, my first column, and what would the sine of 2x be? Well, that would be then, of course, the sine of 2 times 0, which is the sine of 0, and the sine of 0 is 0, right? Or the next one, the sine of 2 times pi over 2 would be the sine of pi, which is 0. The sine of 2 pi, well, that's 0. Do you see a problem here? I just keep getting zeros. I'm not going to tell at all what this is going to look like. That's going to keep happening. So the trick is we don't have the right key points over here to figure out what it is. So let's try picking some more ordered, some more values of x in between 0 and pi over 2, and in between pi over 2 and pi, etc. All right, so it didn't work just to have 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, 2 pi. So I'm just going to put the right in between each of those values. For instance, between 0 and pi over 2 would be pi over 4, etc. And in fact, it might be easier if you write this all with a common denominator, which I'm going to do. So I could write that as pi over 4, then this would be 2 pi over 4. That would be 3 pi over 4. That would be 4 pi over 4. It's still the number pi, right? But this might be easier when it comes time to graph. So it's up to you if you want to do it all with a common denominator or not, but it's easier, I think, when you're ready to graph to think in terms of having all the same denominator. So then the question is, what is y equals sine of 2x? Okay. So we need to do the sine of 2x. So hopefully we could do 2x in our head. So when x is 0, that would just be the sine of 0, which is equal to 0. If we have the sine of 2 times pi over 4, well, what does that give me? What's 2 times pi over 4? That would be pi over 2. And the sine of pi over 2, hopefully you know that, is 1. Next one. Now we're going to do this. Sine of 2 times 2 pi over 4. Or you could think of it as the sine of 2 times pi over 2. Remember, that's the same thing. In any case, you're going to get pi. What's the sine of pi? That's 0. All right, next value. Doesn't matter which one of these I put in. If you do 2 times 3 pi over 4, you're going to get 3 pi over 2. So that would be the sine of 3 pi over 2. Remember, that's down at 270 degrees. That's -1. And then I'm going to put in 2 pi, right? Sine of 2 pi. And I get 0. Well, it seems to me that I am getting you know, the values I want here. And in fact, if you continue putting in 2 times each of these x values, this starts repeating itself. We're going to get 1, 0, -1, and 0 after you do your computations for yourself. So it looks like there's a period, right? What happens? There's a period all the way, whoops, sorry. After we got to pi, that looked to be 1 period. So in between 0 and pi, it looks like there's 1 period. And in fact, that is the case here. The period does happen to be at 2 pi, and if we had enough ordered pairs, it would be obvious, and that's exactly what a calculator does, a graphing calculator. But let's graph what we have here. So for my x values, I went from 0 to 2 pi, but I had 8 increments, and the y values ranged in between -1 and 1. So let's just see what this looks like. Let's call that -1 and 1, and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Here's my 2 pi, right? There's my pi, and I can keep going, in fact, if you want. Right, so I've got my x-axis, my y-axis, and let's graph these points. So remember, I've got 0, 0. I've got pi over 4, 1. So remember, I've done each of these as pi over 4 units, okay? All the increments on the x-axis. So pi over 4, 1. Pi over 2, 0. Pi over 2, I could think of as 2 pi over 4, right? If you want to count 2 places over, that's 2 pi over 4, 0. And then 3 pi over 4 is down at -1. And 2 pi is 0. And if you did graph, you plugged in some other things like the plug in pi over 6 and pi over 3, you're going to get even more ordered pairs. And that's exactly a full cycle of the sine function here. But notice the period only goes between 0 and pi. So if we kept going, we would get these other ordered pairs. I wanted to do more cycles. And this also goes, and you want to have, you know, at some point you want to put some arrows to show it goes on. And so here we have the graph of y equals the sine of 2x. So the period is condensed. The period is actually pi units, not 2 pi. So in other words, if you look at a whole cycle, like in between here and here is a full cycle, right? Right there. In between 0 and pi, we have a full cycle of what the sine function looks like. So instead of 2 pi, it's got a period of pi. So the question is, what's an easy way to figure that out instead of just, you know, trying a bunch of ordered pairs and hoping you get it? So first of all, we note the period for y equals sine of x is 2 pi. We've been doing lots of problems like that. Well, that means we can say that the graph of y equals sine of x completes one cycle between 0 and 2 pi. For instance, you could write this equation. 0 is less than or equal to x is less than or equal to 2 pi. So if you take values between 0 and 2 pi, enough of them, you'll be able to get a good cycle. Now here's how it works if you want to do something else, like for y equals the sine of 2x. All right, so now notice we have a coefficient of x. We say this completes one cycle in between something and 2 pi, but it's not x going in between 0 and 2 pi. It is 2x. So if we solve for x, we would divide all three parts by the positive number 2, right? So we don't have to change the direction of the inequality symbol. And that says that x goes in between 0 and pi, which means for y equals sine of 2x, the period is pi, right? Going in between 0 and pi is just pi. This is your math gal, Julie Harland. Please visit my website at yourmathgal.com, where all of my videos are organized by topic.